The smile on my face is because I've got halfway through doing this sermon and then someone's rung the doorbell. So I've had to stop, cancel it all and start again. So maybe it's better the second time around. There's always an aftermath to significant events, it seems to me. What about the atom bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? They undoubtedly ended the Second World War early. The Americans calculated that if they tried to take the Japanese mainland, then hundreds of thousands, if not millions of American soldiers could die because the Japanese, in protecting their homeland, would fight tooth and nail. The Americans had already suffered terrible casualties on the islands of Iwo Jima and others when they tried to take them back. So they dropped the bombs, but there was an aftermath to those bombs. And historians have argued whether it was worthwhile or not, and better people than me. What about the Iraq War and all that we were told about weapons of mass destruction by Tony Blair? I think he was the Prime Minister at the time. And when we went in, we found no such weapons of mass destruction at all. Sometimes we're not always told the truth, or maybe sometimes it's difficult to discern what the truth is. And what about the Northern Ireland troubles? In my childhood, every night when the news came on, there was something about the troubles in Northern Ireland. Terrible deaths, people murdered, bombings, and we even experienced some here on the mainland UK. And yet they seem to continue today. They may, since the Good Friday Agreement, have been reduced, but even then they're still undercurrents, as we see in our current news. What about the Brexit vote and what we were told there, that billions would be saved if we came out of Europe, to put into our NHS, to revitalise the economy? And what about all that, all those words? And what was the truth regarding immigration? Was it scaremongering to scare people, or was it real? As I said, sometimes it's hard to discern the truth. And what about the Grenfell Tower disaster? And I could have used many others. The cladding that was used, was it used just purely to save money? Was there something else about it? Who's to blame? Is it possible to blame anybody in a situation like that? Significant events, there's often an aftermath. And I've not even mentioned the crashing of the two aeroplanes into the Twin Towers in America. The aftermath of an event is significant. Often in our modern day, we have to have expensive inquiries. But I wonder about the aftermath of the resurrection, what that could have been like. Wonder what inquiry they might have had. For some, it was the end of a dream. This man they had spent the last 3 years with, seen him, seen his miracles. What was it all about? Feeding 5,000, healing people, the parables, his talks, the way he was. What was all that about? Probably more arrests and deaths of the disciples than they actually were. Probably people would have drifted back to their former homes, to their former employment, fishermen, tax collectors, I don't know, whatever else they did. We would have experienced and seen all these things. And that's what they would have done. They would have probably drifted back home and talked about it. They would have disappeared into the ether. I'm sure there would have been discussions amongst them about saying, what was that actually all about? What was it all about? Who was this man? I can imagine them saying, I don't understand it. And the reality is that the followers of Jesus would have drifted back home, they would have dissolved and have been forgotten about. And maybe every other year at Christmas, well, there wouldn't have been a Christmas, would there? So at some significant event, then they would have talked about it and said, can you remember that again? I just don't understand. But today's readings point to something entirely different. They point to joy. There's genuine joy there. People, they met the risen Christ, and there's a joy about them. That sadness from Good Friday all through to Easter Sunday, there was a real sadness about it. I mean, there was real doubt as well. Thomas, he makes it clear, unless I see his hand with the holes in and put my finger in, unless I put my hand into the side where that spear went in, I'm not going to believe. I just think you're all nutty, quite honestly. You've seen an apparition or something else. And yet it says later that Jesus reveals himself, and Thomas says, my Lord and my God. There's real doubt, but there's real belief. It's there in those words. What about chapter 4 of Acts and verse 32. All the believers were of one heart and mind. Let's be honest. If in church we got everyone to believe the same thing, well, it would be a miracle in itself. Not only that, they're of one heart and mind. They agreed. No one claimed that any possession was his own. Wow. What a miracle those two things would be. We all agreed and we all shared our possessions. That new car we bought. Our lovely house. The new lawnmower. The holiday cottage we've got in somewhere, our caravan, that we shared them out because we said, this is what it means to be the generous people of God. These people's lives were transformed, quite literally transformed. There was a change in our mindset from the I to the we. There was that generosity. It says, till there was no needy persons among them. What about that? No needy persons among them. They emptied their ISAs. Sold their stocks and shares, sold their second properties, their pieces of land, and shared them out to those who had needs. That's what it says. Landowners sold land, gave the proceeds to the apostles to distribute. Didn't say, and didn't go around, it seems to me, saying, you know that piece of land you've got used to be mine, I gave that. They gave it. There was a generosity. It was a transformation of the heart. And the apostles spoke of the resurrection with great power. What about that? They spoke of the resurrection with great power. See, there was a crucial difference between possibility and reality. The possibility was that Jesus, his body's missing. He might have been raised from the dead, but it's unlikely. It's more like someone's taken his body away. Didn't Mary say that at the tomb? His body's gone. Where have you taken him? She didn't think, he's risen from the dead. She thought like we'd all think. What have you done with his body? The difference between the possibility and the reality was that Jesus revealed himself to his followers. They saw literally the fruits of the resurrection before them, and they changed from being these miserable, sad, underwhelmed people and suddenly being overwhelmed with joy and generosity. See, the catalyst, the moment of change came not based on information. See, because they told Thomas, we've seen the Lord. And he said, oh, get off with you. When I can put my hands into his actual flesh, then I'll believe. You see, the catalyst for that change was not information. And I can spout off every Sunday. I can come on YouTube, me and Charles. We can give our best sermons. We've got the Bishop of Doncaster coming in a few weeks' time, and she can give it her best. But you know what? Information will not change us. Won't change us. But personal revelation, as those individuals encountered the risen Christ, did change them. And as we encounter the risen Christ, it will change us. I hope it has changed us and will change us. What about some of those encounters? What did they say? Well, what about this one? First of all, Mary. What did she say when she got back? She says, I have seen the Lord. I imagine her rushing in, out of breath, because she's just giving it her best. She's got there. I don't think she sat down and said, now then, guys, got something important to tell you. Something really good. Sit down, put the kettle on, have a cuppa. What about this? What about... I don't know. I'm sure she raised it and it just spewed out of her mouth. I have seen the Lord. And they were just, I'm sure utterly, I don't like the phrase, but I'm sure they were gobsmacked, didn't know what to do. What about Thomas? We couldn't doubting Thomas, but would it be any different to any of us? Would I be any more faithful? When Jesus reveals himself, he doesn't turn around and say, I'm sorry, I've made a mistake. He worships. He says, my Lord and my God. He's just completely overawed. They told him he didn't believe it, and suddenly Jesus is there before them. He's completely overawed. He's seen the risen Christ. He's there before him. He can't touch him, but he's there. What about that story in the back of Luke, the end chapter, penultimate chapter in Luke, where the two of them on the road to Emmaus, and they talk with Jesus, but they don't recognise him. And it says Jesus stayed with them and he broke bread, and in the breaking of the bread, suddenly Jesus revealed himself to them and he disappears. And on the way back, they said these words, were not our hearts burning within us? Something, it touched the very root of their being. The words of Jesus, as he explained the scriptures, as they came alive, their hearts were on fire as they thought, what? Yes, they realised what words he was saying. Their hearts were burning within us. Sometimes this faith touches my emotions. It touches me, and I feel it because I'm just so overwhelmed that this God should be interested in me. And the Apostle Paul, on the road to Damascus, when the blinding light flashes and he can't see, and he says this, "Who are you, Lord? Who are you, Lord?" Paul, the one who was persecuting the Christians and was going to Damascus to sort of get permission to persecute them even more in that region, suddenly he's on his knees, maybe literally or metaphorically speaking, cries out, "Who are you, Lord?" He needs to know who it is. One thing I do know is that these encounters change lives. They change lives because these disciples, and for us today and those down the centuries, that encounter with Jesus moves people from being spectators to being participants. It moves people from being those who sort of went along with what was happening to those who made things happen. These people and us are changed from being supporters to players. Not just sat in the stands cheering others on, "Come on, get along, do more." No, but actually became active players. They moved from being the audience to being on the centre stage. They changed from being receivers to being givers. And they changed from trying to save their lives to being willing to lose them. As I said before, the catalyst was not information, but a personal revelation as they individually encountered the risen Christ. So what about you? It's the Sunday after Easter. For many of us, it will be another Sunday, another that we've experienced in the 10, 20, 30, 40 or more that we've had before. What about you? What has been transformed in you when you have encountered, on the presumption that you have, encountered the risen Christ? God did not draw people into his family to sit on a pew or a chair on Sunday for 50 minutes or an hour, get up, moan about the sermon, moan about the quality of the tea or coffee, moan about the soggy biscuit, moan the fact they have to put a pound in the bowl to pay for it, say the church was cold and go home. No, he didn't. I don't think that God ever envisaged pew fillers. No, that's just been a spectator. God calls us to be participants and activists. So which of those four statements sums up your faith? Mary, you've seen the Lord. You have encountered the risen Christ personally. And the joy, it has just so overwhelmed you. Maybe Thomas, my Lord and my God, that you are principally a worshipper, that you are aware of your own sin and fallenness, and you come and worship God in thankfulness. Maybe you're like one of those on the Emmaus Road, that your heart, and I think I'm like this, that it just burns within me at times, this passion that I have, it touches my emotions and I weep. At times I'm in church and I weep because of the enormity that this God who created this world should reach down I can feel it now, in 1977, and pluck me and say, "John Parker, I am calling you into my family." Wow. Or maybe you're like Paul and you say, you're overwhelmed, you say, who are you, Lord, that you should call me? The one thing that is not recorded in these or any other passages is that people encountered the risen Christ and remained unchanged. No, not a one. Anyone who encountered the risen Christ experienced transformation. No one has ever encountered the risen Christ and been moved from being an unbelieving pew filler to being a believing pew filler. No. Encountering the risen Christ means that it affects other areas and parts of our life. Have you ever considered why that might be? Why no one's ever moved from being an unbelieving pew filler to being a believing pew filler? Have you considered why that is? Maybe because there was no pews. That's one answer. But I think the reality is that when you have encountered the risen Christ, as Mary did, those first disciples did, Thomas did, those on the road to Emmaus did, as Paul and many others have down through the centuries, you can never be the same. Encountering the risen Christ always brings transformation. Encountering the risen Christ is the fruits of the aftermath to what is probably the most significant event in history, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Amen.